Murderous truck drivers prowling the nation's highways for victims have become familiar villains, really, in TV shows and movies.
In fact, the percentage of long-haul truckers who become murderers is small. But according to the FBI, there are likely hundreds of homicidal truck drivers on our roads who have never been caught.
Discover the twisted minds behind history's most notorious serial killers.
In 2004, after noticing a pattern of murdered women being dumped along interstates, the FBI launched its Highway Serial Killings Initiative. The map you see behind me shows where bodies and remains have been found along highways in 500 cases over the course of 30 years.
From early trauma to chilling fantasies, their stories will leave you questioning everything.
Alleged teen serial killer Antonio Reyes remains in custody after his latest detention hearing on a new set of murder charges is delayed.
Don't miss the shocking truth. Hit that play button now. Early influences. From a young age, John Wayne Gacy showed troubling signs of darkness. Born on March 17, 1942, he endured harsh treatment from his alcoholic father, who would often belittle him, calling him weak. These early experiences left a lasting mark, planting seeds of anger and resentment in his mind. His childhood was plagued by loneliness and confusion, unable to connect with others due to a deepening sense of rejection. At the age of 14, he was severely bullied and sexually assaulted, which worsened his mistrust of others. His fantasies began to evolve, fantasies of control, violence, and dominance. These childhood experiences, combined with a twisted need for validation, ultimately led him down a path of horror. By his early adulthood, he would take a darker turn, becoming infamous for his brutal crimes. McDonald tried. Growing up, Ted Bundy exhibited signs that could have been alarming to anyone looking closely. At a young age, he was fascinated with cruelty, a behavior that fit into the notorious McDonald triad. He began by harming animals, showing a deep, unsettling curiosity about their suffering. His obsession with fire setting also became evident, as he would often set small fires around his neighborhood. By the time he reached his late teens, Bundy's behavior grew darker. He had a deep sense of rage towards women, and this escalated into violent fantasies. His childhood experiences, combined with these behaviors, were clear indicators of a much deeper psychological disturbance. The McDonald triad wasn't just a theory, it was a chilling foreshadowing of the horrors that would follow. Psychological profiling. Ed Gein became one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, not just for his crimes, but for the psychological profile that experts later built around him. Born on August 27, 1906, Gein's early life was deeply impacted by his domineering, religious mother, who instilled in him a warped sense of guilt and shame. His mother's constant control over him left him isolated, turning inward for comfort. Gein's strange behaviors were first noted when he started collecting body parts from graveyards, a habit that later escalated into full-blown murder. As forensic psychologists dug deeper into his mind, they identified him as a case study in isolation, obsession, and a desire for control. His psychological profile suggested that he viewed his mother as both a protector and a tyrant, and in an effort to reclaim power, he turned to grotesque acts. Fantasy world. For Richard Ramirez, a life built on dark fantasies was the foundation of his crimes. Born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, Ramirez's childhood was marked by violence and abuse, especially from his father. But it was his exposure to graphic horror films and violent imagery that shaped his disturbing fantasies. By his teen years, he had already begun to envision himself as a killer, fantasizing about power, domination, and terrorizing others. These fantasies were not just idle thoughts. They became his reality. Ramirez's crimes, committed during the 1980s, reflected a deep need to act out these dark imaginings. He believed he was invincible, fueled by visions of Satan and other demonic forces, which gave him a sense of power over his victims. His fantasies became his reality, and the world would never be the same. Neurological factors. David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam, had a disturbing history of violent behavior that can be partly explained by neurological factors. Born on June 1, 1953, Berkowitz was raised in an unstable environment, but it was his time in the military that seemed to exacerbate his psychological issues. Suffering from extreme paranoia, he became convinced that his neighbor's dog was communicating with him, sending him messages from the devil. Studies of Berkowitz's brain have shown some abnormalities, and his erratic behavior could be linked to these neurological issues. As a child, he exhibited signs of aggression, and as an adult, these patterns escalated. Berkowitz's crime spree in 1976 to 1977 left New York City in terror, his belief in voices pushing him to kill. His case raised questions about how brain function could contribute to violent tendencies. Media influence. The Zodiac Killer case remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in American history. Born on April 18, 1934, the killer terrorized the Bay Area in the late 1960s and early 1970s. But what made the case particularly disturbing was the killer's use of media to fuel his notoriety. He sent cryptic letters and ciphers to local newspapers, taking pride in the fear and confusion he caused. The Zodiac Killer's obsession with being recognized in the media led to him playing a dangerous game with police and the public. By feeding into the media's thirst for sensational stories, he maintained control over the narrative of his crimes. The way he manipulated the media played a pivotal role in the continued mystery and terror surrounding his identity, leaving a lasting impression on the culture of fear that surrounded serial killers. Notorious cases. One of the most infamous cases in the history of serial killers is Ted Bundy, whose charm and intelligence masked the horrors he committed. Born on November 24, 1946, Bundy's outward normalcy made it difficult for anyone to suspect the true nature of his violent tendencies. His murders, which took place in the 1970s, were marked by a disturbing blend of brutality and charisma. Bundy's charm was his weapon. He often approached women, feigning injury or disability before abducting and murdering them. Despite his horrific actions, he was able to evade capture for years, often appearing in the media as a sympathetic figure. His case became a media spectacle, as Bundy's ability to manipulate both the public and law enforcement added another chilling layer to his story. Control dynamics. Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer, took control of his victims' lives in a disturbingly methodical way. Born on February 18, 1949, Ridgway's need for dominance was deeply rooted in his early years. Raised in a home where his mother was overbearing and his father distant, Ridgway developed a distorted view of relationships, especially with women. Ridgway's desire for control grew over time, leading to the murders of at least 49 women during the 1980s and 1990s. He would often return to the bodies of his victims, engaging in ritualistic behavior, making sure to leave a sense of power and ownership over them. His killings were not random. Each act reflected a deep need to dominate, to control, and to assert his will. Ridgway's ability to elude capture for so many years showcased just how deeply his need for control had consumed him. Victim selection. Aileen Wuornos, one of the most infamous female serial killers in U.S. history, carefully chose her victims based on a disturbing sense of vulnerability. Born on February 29, 1956, Wuornos had a traumatic childhood marked by abuse and neglect. As she grew older, her resentment towards men deepened, especially after a series of failed relationships and sexual assaults. Wuornos' victim selection was not random. Her targets were typically men who she believed to be a threat to her, often picking up men along highways. Her murders, which took place in 1989 to 1990, were not just acts of rage, but a twisted form of retaliation. She viewed these men as symbols of a society that had wronged her. Each killing was a reflection of her complex hatred, driven by past trauma and a desire for revenge. preventive measures. The horrifying crimes of serial killers like Jack Unterweger highlight the need for more effective profiling and preventive measures. Born on August 16, 1950, Unterweger was a journalist and convicted killer who used his charm and intelligence to deceive people into believing he had changed. His killings, which spanned across Austria and the United States in the 1990s, highlighted the difficulty in identifying serial offenders who appear normal on the surface. Preventive measures, such as more accurate psychological profiling, were essential in catching Unterweger. Law enforcement began to refine their methods of analyzing patterns in behavior, focusing on criminals who fit a specific profile. The difficulty of predicting and preventing these crimes led to increased efforts in training officers, developing databases, and sharing information across jurisdictions. Still, Unterweger's ability to blend and showed that even with advancements, prevention remains a complex challenge. The dark secrets don't stop here. Catch our next video, The Missing Heiress, a case that shook the nation, and uncover another chilling mystery. Subscribe now or risk missing the truth.